Welcome everybody to week 11 of R2 F2 Prognostication. As always, I am Robbie Russell. And let me get right to week 11 material, starting with the quarterbacks. Now, obviously, Drew Brees, Peyton Manning, your obvious starters for week 11. But addition to them, I also like Russell Wilson. Now, it's not 100% sure that Percy Harvin is going to be available for the Seahawks come Sunday, but that doesn't really matter if he plays or doesn't play for Russell Wilson. You know, as you've seen for the first, eight games, 9 games, 10 games, they haven't had a bye yet. You know, it hasn't mattered for Russell Wilson. You look at last week against Atlanta, you know, Kurtz with a touchdown, Tate with a touchdown. But this week, the Seahawks face off against the Vikings, and that defense is tied for the most passing touchdowns given up on the season so far. And also, in addition to that, they've given up 4 300-yard passing games this season already, and 2 of them have come on the road when Minnesota's traveled. So I definitely like Russell Wilson this week. If you have him, start him. Another one is Nick Foles. Now, this past Sunday, this guy's just been ridiculous. He picked up where he left off in week 9. He threw for another 3 touchdowns and didn't turn the ball over at all. And this week, he gets a favorable matchup at home. He welcomes in the Washington Redskins. And again, you know, this Skins defense has given up an average of 290 yards, passing yards per game on the road. And I understand that they have faced on the road Aaron Rodgers and Peyton Manning, but with how well Nick Foles is playing, and the Redskins giving up an average of 24.7 points to opposing quarterbacks over the last 3 weeks, you have to start him. The dude has been on fire. Washington's pass defense is not well. They've gotten better from where they were at the beginning of the season, but they're still not great. So with how hot he's been and the weapons around him, you got to start Nick Foles if you have him. In addition to those 2 guys, I also like Ryan Tannehill, Case Keenum, Robert Griffin III in the same game as Nick Foles, Mike Glennon, and yes, I've already had this guy as a sleeper twice this season, and he screwed me both times, as well as I'm sure owners. I don't have the guy, but Eli Manning. So, and I know the second time, which was earlier in the season, like 3-4 weeks ago, I said I wouldn't have Eli as a sleeper anymore. You know, he's been a bust, like I said, 2 weeks as I've called him a sleeper. But you've got to figure, third time's a charm. You know, he's facing Green Bay. Green Bay only has 3 interceptions on defense this season. They've given up 17 passing touchdowns. Eli, this is a matchup you have to take advantage of. No more 180-yard games. This is it this week. I feel it. Let's go, Eli. Moving over to the other side, few busts that I don't like this week. One is Tom Brady, and Brady's in a tricky situation. Now, every time Brady's on national television, he loves to produce, but he's facing off on the ESPN special against Carolina, who welcomes Tom Brady to Charlotte with the 4th best pass defense. Only the Panthers and the Titans have given up 7 passing touchdowns this season. But a plus that's working for Tom Brady, a plus that I don't like, but it's working for Tom Brady, is he should get his receiving running back in Shane Vereen. But even if you look at that, you know, everybody's like, oh, wait till Gronk comes back. Gronk's been back for 3 games now. And if you look at his fantasy points, Brady with Gronk has put up 10.4 in week 7, 9.3 in week 8, and 37.6 in week 9 there before the bye week. Not very stellar numbers for getting his best receiver back. I just think this is a game where Brady has to be left on the bench for another one of the options I mentioned above. Joining Brady is Terrell Pryor. In that same game, Cam Newton against the Patriots defense. The Patriots defense has allowed only 3 quarterbacks to score over 20 fantasy points this season. That's pretty impressive. If you consider through 9 games. That means 6 games, the quarterbacks up against them have not put up 20 or more fantasy points. Andrew Luck tomorrow night, Phillip Rivers, and Colin Kaepernick. On to the running backs. Andre Ellington. Now, last week, Rashard Mendenhall returned from an injury, and it didn't hurt Ellington's touches as much as I thought it would. Ellington ran the ball 11 times. Mendenhall rushed it for 13 times. But at the end of the day, Ellington had more yards as he accumulated 55 yards on those 11 carries. This week, the duo travels to the East Coast to take on the worst rush defense of the Jacksonville Jaguars, where I see Ellington rewarding his owners very nicely. Don't be alarmed by the Jaguars only giving up 2 100-yard rushers this season, and one of them has been at home. So really, they've only given up 1 100-yard rushing game at home, but they've allowed 6 of their 14 rushing touchdowns at home. And you have to remember, they've played less games at home than they have on the road. So 6 of their 14 isn't terribly bad. I like Ellington also as a flex play because of his receiving ability. I see him catching at least 5 or 6 passes come Sunday. Others include Ray Rice. If he's actually used for the entire game, John Harbaugh. God, Rice owners have got to be frustrated as I have him on one team. Chicago's given up the most 100-yard rushing games this season with 5. D'Angelo Williams and Jonathan Stewart against the Patriots' third worst ranked rush defense. But take note, it was Jonathan Stewart who carried the ball majority of the time last week against the 49ers. Frank Gore against the Saints. The Saints have yielded 5 rushing scores in their last 4 games, and they've been scored on from a running back in 4 straight games. Marshawn Lynch, Giovanni Bernard, and of course you have to put in your receiving heavy running backs such as Reggie Bush, Matt Forte, and LaShawn McCoy, Jamal Charles. To the flip side, you got to sit Fred Jackson and CJ Spiller. The duo of Buffalo has been inconsistent this year. They welcomed the Jets to town on Sunday, and with that trip by the Jets, they're bringing the number 1 ranked rush defense. They're led by the big D men, Muhammad Wilkerson, Sheldon Richardson up front, and they haven't allowed a 100-yard rusher yet this season. It's actually Fred Jackson who's put up the most yards on the Jets in a single game this year with 72 yards. I don't see a similar performance from Fred Jackson or CJ Spiller, and the only team to find success against the Jets has been the Falcons in Week 5, where Jason Snelling had a receiving touchdown and Jacquizz Rodgers had 2 rushing touchdowns. Other than that week, the Jets haven't allowed a running back to score over 5.1 fantasy points while on the road. Pretty impressive. So, sit both running backs there for Buffalo. No Sean Moreno. He's only starter in PPR leagues. The Chiefs have only given up 1 rushing touchdown to running backs, and they've given up 2 receiving touchdowns to running backs. And 2 of those 3 have come on the road. But I still don't see Marino putting up great numbers in standard leagues. But with 24 catches over his last 4 games, that's hard to ignore in PPR leagues. As I mentioned, Shane Vereen, I don't see him doing a whole lot, although he comes back. His counterpart, Stephen Ridley, Maurice Jones-Drew, Matt Forte, who should only be started in PPR leagues. They're facing a tough Ravens rush defense that has only given up one rushing touchdown this season. Chris Ivory, Rashad Jennings, Eddie Lacy, and Chris Johnson tomorrow night. Wide receivers. Vincent Jackson has been on kind of a slump here the past 2 weeks, but expect him to come back fully this week against the Falcons defense, where in week 7, Vincent Jackson torched this pass defense for 138 yards on 10 catches and 2 touchdowns. And since that game, though, however, Atlanta has only allowed one 100-yard receiver, and that was this past Sunday, to Golden Tate from the Seattle Seahawks. Vincent Jackson only faced the Falcons one time during his years in San Diego. He comes over to Tampa, and he's faced them 3 times already. In those 3 games, in each of those games, he's posted at least 50 yards receiving. And 2 of those games have been over 90 yards, as I just mentioned one of them. Now, that Week 7 matchup was the first time he found the end zone against the Dirty Birds. And he can definitely put up similar numbers without question this weekend at home. I don't see 2 touchdowns. I see 1. Don't expect maybe 138 yards, but maybe 90 to 100, give or take. The Lions defense has been, they started out well this year. The first 3 weeks, they didn't allow a single touchdown to a wide receiver. They gave up 4 touchdowns to wide receivers through their first 6 games. But since then, I don't know where Detroit's passing defense has gone. They've been scored on 7 times by receivers, and 3 of those receivers have posted triple figures in the receiving yardage category. Now, although Pittsburgh's O-line is beat up, Big Ben, he's been sacked the second most this season, only behind Ryan Tannehill, I still like Antonio Brown and Emmanuel Sanders. Sanders has racked up 28 targets over his last 3 games, which gives him 74 for the total. For the total on the season. He's only 19 targets behind Antonio Brown, and they're going to have to throw the ball and they're going to have to score. If you have either one of those, I'd say start them. Now, speaking of defenses going downhill, over the last 4 games, the Colts have allowed number 1 wide receivers to post at least 80 yards receiving, with 3 of them going over the century mark. In those 4 games, receivers have scored 8 times, with number 1 wide receivers getting 7 of those 8 scores. Those number 1s, they're averaging 30.5 points. So I see this game close throughout. I like Kendall Wright, who's really developed into a nice number 1 receiver. You have to start Kendall Wright if you have him tomorrow night. And I also like another Titan receiver that I'll talk about here in a second. I also like Hakeem Nicks, Marvin Jones on a nice bounce-back matchup, DeAndre Hopkins, Golden Tate, Mike Wallace for the Dolphins, Riley Cooper, Cecil Shorts, and Harry Douglas. Now, that other Titans receiver I was talking about is tight end Delaney Walker. This guy's gotten 18 targets through 3 games with Ryan Fitzpatrick at the quarterback position. Fitz played in week 4, but it was late in the game, and Walker didn't have a target, so they really didn't even have to throw the ball much in week 4. But when Fitz entered the game last week in the second quarter, he targeted Delaney Walker 7 times, and there was a touchdown connection there as well. Last year in Buffalo, the tight end Scott Chandler was targeted 74 times before being hurt in week 16. The Colts have only given up 1 touchdown to a tight end this season, but I still like the matchup in a close game. Others are Tim Wright, Scott Chandler, Jordan Reed, and a deep reach of Zach Ertz. And to wrap it up with defenses, the Chiefs, they have to be started. They're the number 1 defense. You can't bench them just because they're playing Peyton Manning. The only ones I'd start over them is the Seahawks, the Cardinals, the Giants, the Jets, and the Panthers. And there you have it, week number 11 material. Until next week, I'm Robbie Russell, and good luck in your Week 11 matchup.